Hey everyone, my name is Catherine and welcome to my channel, and today I wanted to do a massive book haul. I love reading. I got really into reading during the pandemic and it's just continued on, and I just wanted to show you all what kind of books I got. Some of them I've read, some of them I haven't read, some of them are physical, some audio, some on my Kindle, but I love to see what other people are reading, and I thought it'd be just really fun to do a haul specifically for books. So I'm just gonna dive right in. The first book I'm going to show you is one of the most recent books I read, and it is called Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison. And I got this book maybe like 2 weeks ago and I finished it a couple of days ago. But basically it is about a main character who is this like typical like city person living in New York City, specifically in Manhattan, who's very career driven and just loves the city. She ran away from her hometown and has not looked back since. Turns out her sister ends up getting pregnant and her boyfriend just kind of leaves her in the situation. Also, don't mind my dog who's going to be appearing in and out of the video. She goes back to her hometown to help support her sister, and there she happens to get into a car wreck, and in this car wreck, it is at night, she's by herself, and she gets attacked by an animal. And she's very thankful and lucky to be alive, but all of a sudden, these different symptoms start coming up, and sounds like she might be a werewolf. I really enjoyed this book. I wanted to read it, especially for Halloween and for the month of October, and I do recommend it. I have a Goodreads account and I gave it 5 stars. Another book I have is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. I also read this book, and this book is such a unique type of a book. It is set in the Pacific Northwest, which that is where I'm from and live, and it has to do with this elderly woman. She's about in her late 60s, maybe 70s, named Tova, and Marcellus, an octopus. And Tova works at an aquarium. She does not, her husband and her son are not around anymore. Her son actually went missing and is still missing, and so she's very alone, this older lady, and so she just got a job working at the aquarium and has this really special connection with this octopus. And what's really interesting is it goes back and forth between the perspective of Tova and also Marcellus the octopus, which I thought was pretty cool. I normally don't read about animals where you hear from their point of view, and I thought this was a really unique and also just like heartwarming read, so I definitely recommend it as well. Another book I recently got is Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. I love this book so much. I'm not gonna lie, I think this is one of my favorite books of all time, and I know that's saying a lot. I read it earlier this year. I actually got a hard copy, a fresh new hard copy for my friend who is wanting to get back into reading and isn't the biggest reader, and she's really into historical fiction. And this actually was turned into a Apple Plus TV series, and I watched it with her. The TV series is similar to this book, but it's also different enough where I think it's very well worth the read if you've already seen the show. Obviously, I always prefer to read something and then watch the show if you have the choice, but definitely recommend both reading and watching the show and book. The main character is named Sunjaya, and she grew up in Korea, and then different circumstances leads her to Japan, and this is set back in like the early 1900s, and you get to see like a multi-generational story between Sunjaya and even her mom and her son and her grandchildren. And it is just such a fascinating read to read about these people growing up in this time where Korean people faced a lot of racism in Japan at the time. And honestly, I didn't know much about that. I don't remember learning much about that, so I found it to be really fascinating. This book definitely highly recommend. Even if you're not into historical fiction very much, I would recommend reading it, or at least watching the show, but definitely both. Now, some books that I have bought recently but have not yet read. The first one is Nowhere Left to Go: How Climate Change is Shaping Species to the Ends of the Earth. I specifically have a big passion for sustainability, environmental affairs, climate change, conservation, all of those topics. It goes into depth about certain species in certain regions of the world. Like this is talking about the flight of the Arctic fox, obviously in the Arctic. And what I like to do is I like to be listening to an audiobook at the same time as listening to an audiobook, be reading two different books, one nonfiction and one fiction, and a lot of times my nonfiction books tend to be something that is related to environmental affairs of some sort. Some other books that have to do with climate change that I found interesting that I bought but have not yet read is The Hydrogen Revolution, A Blueprint for the Future of Clean Energy. I went to Barnes & Noble recently by me, and they had this massive sale. I went on the very last night they were open because they were closing down the store and moving to a different location, and I got like 4 or 5 hardcover books for $20. It was insane. And a lot of the books left in the store aren't like the popular like top sellers at the moment because they're just trying to get rid of their inventory, but I was able to actually find some hidden gems such as this book. And looking at it, I always look on Goodreads, it has really good reviews, and if you know about like climate change and all of that, clean energy and just the way that we use energy is really one of the biggest things we can do right now to help fight the issue of climate change. So actually reading about that I thought would be really great as well. I also got A Brief History of Earth, 4 Billion Years in 8 Chapters. I thought the cover was pretty. It was one of the books I got for like a massive sale and massive discount. And I thought this would be kind of cool to just learn more about, just like, yeah, the earth that we live in. I liked the shape of this book and the font as well. And sometimes if I don't like a certain font or how like the book is laid out and presented physically, I will then go and get it on a Kindle because I have a Kindle and you can change that up, but I'm sure a lot of people do that as well. Another book I got in that massive sale is The Last Diving Horse in America, Rescuing Gamel and Other Animals' Lessons in Living and Loving. And I started reading this book. This is one of my current nonfiction books that I'm reading. I had heard of this very briefly, but I totally forgot about it because this was well before my time. But back in the day, there used to be this show, it's almost like a circus act, where there would be this really high platform, I don't remember how many feet up in the air, but they would have a horse go up and a woman would jump on the horse as it's running to like jump off of this high platform and basically dive into water, and people would watch this. And this was really popular in the early to mid 1900s, and I think the last show was in like the 1970s or something along those lines, until animal activists were like, hey, this isn't great, we should stop doing this. It's just crazy that this used to be a thing. I think it was like in New Jersey, especially, like one of the main attractions on one of the piers. And I just think that's so fascinating that that was a thing, and I can't imagine people doing that. That sounds so crazy to me. Another book I got is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I just think this cover is so cool with the colors and the waves and the retro look to it as well. And I got it as a signed copy, so I thought that was really cool. I did not read this book, but it basically sums up about 2 different college students and how they basically built up this company, and it has to do with video games. I really only know the bare bones of this book. I've again not read it, but it just sounded like a really interesting book to me, and it's pretty new. If you saw a recent video of mine, you would know I recently started working at Nintendo, so especially with that, I wanted to start reading this as I started my new job. I've been at Nintendo for a little over a month and I've yet to read this because I've been really focused on reading like thrillers and Halloween focused books during October, but I will definitely get around to reading this and I'm excited to read it as well. Speaking of Halloween books, I picked up this book only 2 days ago, I believe, and it is called The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sanju Mandana. It's basically just like a romantic book that has to deal with witches. I go to several different books around me. One of them is specifically a local bookstore. They do monthly book clubs, and this is their pick for the next romance book club, which is a couple of days into November, like just after Halloween. And I'd never been to one of their book club talks before because I never read any of those books in particular on time to participate and go to, and understand what's going on. And so when I saw this and I saw the book club, I thought that'd be really fun to do that. So I'm going to try to finish my current book and also another book and this book at the end of October. Does anyone else like pre-plan what they're reading by like multiple books? It's probably not the best because then it helps kind of stimulate the idea of like, I need to finish this book so I can get into the next and not actually focus on enjoying in the moment of what you're reading. That I know I need to work on. Okay, then looking on my phone, I've been really into listening to audiobooks, probably because there's been a few audiobooks recently that I read that I was obsessed with. One of them was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. I'm sure a lot of you have read that book recently. It's been super popular. I decided to listen to the audio version because it's narrated by Jennette, so I think it just made the whole experience even more personal. I also listened to Regretting You by Colleen Hoover. I love Colleen Hoover. She's probably one of my favorite authors, and I really loved Regretting You. Again, I listened to the audiobook in just like a couple of days. When you get a good book and you just listen to it all the time, it's just great. Well, I listen to audiobooks while doing chores, driving, going on walks, that kind of stuff. And then It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. That came out as I'm filming this yesterday. I'm really excited because I did read It Ends With Us and really liked that book. And this book, It Starts With Us, basically looks at some of the other characters in that original book and it's been highly anticipated by many people. The Night She Disappeared by Lisa Jules, I believe I said that correctly. I listened to that on the Libby app. That is an app where you can basically have a virtual library card and listen or read books for free. And I love that app. I've talked about it many times before. A lot of times there's wait times. So for example, It Starts With Us, the wait time is like several months. So I just decided to get it on Audible. But sometimes the wait time isn't too long, or you can pre-plan and put in multiple holds. But the book that I just listened to, The Night She Disappeared, it was ready right away. I didn't have to wait at all, and I really liked that book. I just finished listening to that audiobook today and I was really into it. I probably finished it in like, I don't know, 2-3 days. Now, looking at my Kindle, I am currently reading Bunny by Mona Awad. I only heard that this book's very bizarre, and so far it is. I was reading it earlier today and was kind of disgusted by what happens in the book. It is essentially in the horror section, which I never read or watch horror things. I'm into thriller and dramas. Horror, not so much. But I've heard a lot about it. I love rabbits, which if you love rabbits, you might not like this book very much. But I also saw it's like a good thing to read during like October because it's horror. But that's currently what I'm reading and something that I consider like part of my book haul. I also recently got Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood, and I read that. And there's been a lot of mixed reviews on that book because a lot of people are saying that a lot of her books are kind of like the same plot and kind of the same thing over and over again. But I personally love romance books, and I feel like I'm not hard to please. I just love cutesy things, and I myself was a graduate student, not in STEM, but I've done a lot of schooling in my life, and I love school, and seeing love stories in an academic setting is pretty cool, and especially in STEM for females, I think it's very empowering as well. So I generally like her books and haven't had too much of an issue with them at all. And then another book is The Carbon Almanac, It's Not Too Late. It got very, very good reviews, and it's more of a positive book when it comes to climate change and the good things that are happening and things that we can do where, again, it's not too late to change things around. And I was looking through it, and it basically also just really goes into specifics with like, what is carbon and what is, you know, what are different types of clean energy, just really going into the basics and really being educational. And I thought it was a very positive book given all the negativity thrown around in that subject. So that's my next nonfiction that I want to read. And the last book that I want to include in this book haul, which I realize is not in front of me, it's somewhere in my house. It is Verity by Colleen Hoover. I can put it up here. I've actually already read this book. I listened to it last year. I don't know if anyone else is like this. I'm like this, and it's a bit annoying. I tend to not remember a lot of things I read. It depends on the book and how much of an impact it had on me. But then again, Verity, I remember loving that book. I listened to it in the car. I was on like the edge of my seat. It made my car rides so much more enjoyable. And yet I only remember like the general plot of the book. I'm sure if I reread it, I will be like, oh yeah, I remember this happened. But I'm kind of like that, where my memory may not be the best of certain books. I mean, the books I read more recently, I like remember very well. Or like Pachinko that I read way earlier in the year, I remember quite well. But for some reason, I feel like I could reread Verity and kind of remind myself what happens. And there's this new edition that came out, and it's in this kind of gold foil hardcover, and it has a bonus chapter as well. So just the fact that I'm going to be reading it in a different medium, actually a physical book versus listening. There's a bonus chapter, and I love Colleen Hoover, and I remember that being my favorite Colleen Hoover book. And I think it's a thriller for October, that it was a good pick. So that's going to be another book I want to read this month, along with this book and finishing Bunny, to really get myself in the Halloween mood. But that's been my book haul. I realized it kind of turned into like not just a book haul, but also just talking about different books that I've been reading. But I tend to do that a lot. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and let me know what books you've gotten lately, or what books you want to get, what you're excited about, if you're reading anything Halloween related. And thank you guys so much for watching. I hope to see you in a future video of mine. Bye!